Reddit, what is the worst city that you have ever been to, worldwide? Karachi, Pakistan. I saw malnourished children wandering a field of garbage, eating whatever was edible from the multi-acre pile of waste. I saw all manner of crippled children, teenagers, adults, and the elderly begging for the equivalent of $20 on the streets to stay away from starvation. More than one cried when I gave them money. I heard of my aunt's friend whose life savings were stolen from her as she walked out of the bank. She was making a deposit on a flat. She was robbed at gunpoint, then chased the thieves for a mile down busy streets screaming and crying for someone to help her, as people made room for them to pass. My cousin there worked as a reporter for a brief period and did an article on the Hijra. They were essentially transgenders who begged and extorted money basically to get them to stop harassing you. There was a man who was kidnapped by the Hijra, locked in a basement to a chair for 3 days, and repeatedly beaten with a board with nails in it. He was given a choice, to have his manhood cut off and to become a Hijra, or to be killed there in the chair. He eventually befriended one, who allowed him breaks without supervision, and he escaped through a window. He then ran to the nearest rickshaw driver, got him to drive away, and then broke down and told him his story. The rickshaw driver then gave him a free ride to the hospital. I saw a basic lack of any city planning. Highways interlaced neighborhoods, so the only way to get to your house from a bus stop was to jaywalk across a road with a speed limit of 65 km/h. I had to engage in this myself a few times when visiting relatives. I saw an unrevealed level of pollution and littering. During rush hour the streets downtown had a visibility of 20-30 featuring. The streets stank of smog and burned your eyes. The streets themselves were littered with all manner of plastics, human filth, and miscellaneous detritus. People didn't seem to use garbage cans. It was commonplace to throw garbage on the streets. There was also no visible form of garbage disposal. Garbage was piled at street corners and burned. The stench. I will never forget that stench. I could go on for a while. I stayed there for a period of 2 months while I was 13. My parents were with me the first 2 weeks, but had to get back to their real lives. I elected to stay with relatives I had never met before and really soak up the culture. It was a blast, but I will never go back to that terrifying city. I almost died a couple times there, and to go back now I would much more likely die. Pattaya, Thailand. Most Westerners here are greasy, overweight, raunchy tourists. It's full of poor women from the north who come there out of desperation to get involved in the trade. It tries to maintain an aura of glamour and vivaciousness, but everything about it is tawdry. Pattaya is honestly the worst beach city you can go to. It's filled with fat frisky Russian men trying to frick an oriental girl. But I can assure you that the rest of Thailand isn't that bad, and there are some amazing beach towns cities out there. Basildon, Essex, UK. The one time I went there I was offered a BJ by a drunk 14-year-old girl before I'd even left the multi-story car park. When I told her to get lost she reassured me that it was okay. She had condoms. The town is little more than an endless parade of inbreds and drunken teenage moms in tracksuits. Frick everything about that place. It is definitely Camden for me. I've been to some crappy places around the world, including Palestinian areas when you weren't really supposed to be there, and legitimately crappy parts of Philly. I'm from a quiet suburb and the Temple area is scary to me. Actual North Philly, and I've never felt as uncomfortable in an immediate, self-preserving sort of way as I was in Camden. It's a perfectly fine city if you just take the speed line over to certain places. A few of the destinations are innocuous, the aquarium, the Twitter Center, etc. But certain areas, man. I once got lost driving around Camden. It was the middle of the afternoon in the middle of the week, 1 PM on a Tuesday, if I recall correctly, and there were people loitering on either side of a large street. As I stopped at a light, they just started casually shambling towards my car. I mean, not trying to sneak up out of my line or sight or even sprint forward to catch me off guard. This was a decent sized group of people, a handful from either side, just casually stumbling towards my car. It was like a zombie movie. I felt like I was in a scary movie. I ended up running the red light before they reached me. I am a big dude and I've been mugged at gunpoint more than once. I am not a squeamish dude. But at that moment I was like, I am not ready for this city. Psychologically this is something I ain't ready to swallow. Port-au-Prince, Haiti is pretty terrible, and I went there before the earthquake. Be running through the streets, burning piles of trash, kids no more than 3 begging you for food. Not a pleasant experience. Most people I met in Haiti were quite nice though, so that makes up for it a little. Tijuana, let me dip my paintbrush in crap and paint you a picture. It's actually difficult to determine where the city ends and the dump begins. Hint, the dump has burnt horse carcasses. There is dust and trash everywhere. People's houses are made out of scavenged garbage. Most of the buildings look like the builders got fired halfway through the job. There's so much dust that even the sky has a crappy brownish hue. On every barbed wire fence, there must have been thousands of raggedy plastic shopping bags just flapping in the wind. Even goats hate it there. Djibouti, worst city in Africa, 15 miles from the Somali border, and it smells like crap. The only thing there is a massive army base and a fueling stop for naval vessels. Gateshead, it's like a city from Fallout. Basically me and my parents were curious and in Newcastle, so we took the metro across the Type to Gateshead. We were not very impressed. I lived in Rough and Ready, Car for a while. They separated from the Union during the Civil War. The town was mostly trailer parks and about once monthly a trailer would blow up due to a meth lab. I haven't traveled a lot. I'm from Minneapolis and live there currently. This isn't really a city, as it is a small town, but I went to Grove, Oklahoma with my uncle, about 40 miles SW of Joplin, and it was the most disgusting place ever. The people were awful. Awful people. The worst people I've ever met. They were obsessed with politics, and of course hyper uninformed. I made a promise with my uncle I wouldn't open my mouth. I'm a rascal, so every time I met a new person and they said Minnesota, you are F liberal, or Minneapolis, that's a blue state, right? Or when they openly referred to taking a crap as taking an Obama, I couldn't say anything, and it was starting to give me chest pains. On top of that, the people who talk about liberty and free speech and I wish Obama would try to take my guns. I wish someone would. Which is always funny because these freaking people talk about how theoretically tough they are, but they freaking live in the middle of nowhere where nothing would ever happen. And they can't shoot at a freaking tornado. Which was their only option since none of their houses have basements. But no worries, they said, they never get tornadoes around there. Fast forward to Joplin about 6 months later. Morons. Not the Joplin people. The people I met. So, the freedom seekers came in and caught me watching the morning repeat of The Daily Show. A 50-year-old stranger, a freaking stranger, screamed at me, "Turn that East Coast liberal crap off." Now, it wasn't his house, and so he came over and turned the TV off. I turned it back on. He tried to grab the remote from my hand and I told him if he ever touched me again all compensation handguns wouldn't save him. On top of that, 3 of them were on M. I caught one of them stealing my uncle's back pills, morphine, on and on. The town itself was hotter than a fresh Obama in a gas station bathroom. Bugs were Starship Troopers-esque. Their lake was man-made but somehow full of 6-foot snakehead fish. Their Walmart had more species of humanoids than a Tolkien book and their hospital fell over. The end. Delhi, India. I've lived in Los Angeles most of my life and was totally unprepared for the amount of pollution in Delhi. I was there for 10 days and visibility at best was about 2 miles, after which everything disappears into the brown mist. People litter everywhere and don't think twice about it. I was dumbfounded to see empty trash cans surrounded by trash. It's not the kind of city a foreigner can blend in, and you're constantly hounded by beggars, and almost everyone tries charging you 320 times normal rates. Cutting in line is the norm. You can literally be speaking with a cashier, and someone will squeeze their head between your face and the hole in the window through which you were speaking to the cashier without a second thought. Traveling in cars there is torturous. The worst traffic I have ever seen. People signal only with their horn. Making a left, honk your horn. Going through an intersection, honk. Someone in the way, honk. You're surrounded by hundreds of cars, mostly rickshaws actually, almost all of which are honking. People drive both ways on both sides of the roads. Scary as heck. The smell. Nothing seems to ever be finished there, and when it is, all the refuse leftover material is right next to the site. The police, military, not sure which, all have automatic weapons, and they will also extort you for whatever they can. Open sewage troughs, sickening disparity of wealth living side by side, opulent, luxurious hotels, butt up against shanties, guards and walls surround the hotels, crowded, long lines, no beef. Street food looks delicious but will make you viciously sick. Did I miss anything? I enjoyed my visit though, granted me perspective I didn't have before. To clarify, there are lots of great and interesting things about India, its people, rich culture and historical monuments, etc. But there are some glaring issues that need to be faced by its society as a whole. Pretending they do not exist will not make them go away. If you feel bad about the way that people in this thread feel about your city country, help change it. Don't be an apologist, be an activist. Don't attribute poverty, pollution and indifference to forces beyond your control. Juarez, Mexico was a god-awful place. The slums on the outskirts of town are built from trash and debris, in what is essentially a functional landfill with people living in it. The gut-wrenching effect of such extreme poverty was compounded by the staggeringly opulent mansions that sit only a few miles away. I have never seen such extreme economic highs and lows in such close proximity. I was originally going to say Kathmandu, Nepal, because it's not really even a city. It's just a collection of rubble that people live in. It's dirty. Everything gives you food poisoning. Your sinuses start bleeding from the air pollution. But the Nepalese are so dang nice most of the time and it has so much history. Then I remembered I've been through Camden, NJ on a train. Freaking heck. An American city that looked like it survived a world war. I really didn't like Naples. Maybe I just went at a bad time, but the city seemed really dirty, smelly, and dangerous. I'd heard crossing the road in Italy was risky, but drivers in Naples did not give a crap about pedestrians at all. I'm sure it can't be like that all the time. I was in Naples last month, had a great time, but yeah, the driving was mental. You get used to it though. Just walk and cars do tend to use their brakes. Not a town, but I once took a trip to Dominican Republic. It was freaking miserable. From the airport to the resort, I saw nothing but misery and poverty. Third world nation. All along the streets were shacks and shanties. Children swarming the tourists begging for change. Dead donkey in the middle of the road rotting away. Prostitution all over the place. Some clearly minors. It was just depressing. The resort was nice, but whenever you left that false bubble of paradise, it was freaking depressing. Your description reminds me of Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Lived there a few years, and yeah, it was poor as frick, but pretty peaceful. So if you put yourself in the shoes of the locals, assuming they have any shoes, it's not that bad. I knew an Ethiopian guy, left the country for the first time ever to live in Berlin for a while. He hung himself 2 weeks in. No place like home, I guess. Birmingham, Alabama, USA. For those that don't know, good old Birmingham was at one point the murder capital of the USA, and still is within the top 10, maybe 20. I grew up there. I lost 6 of my best friends there. I lost my daughter there. If I ever become ruler of the world, Birmingham, Alabama gets a very special nuke. Plovdiv, Bulgaria. It was my first time in an Eastern European city and I have never been more depressed in my life. I've seen some pretty crappy cities. I'm looking at Utica, NY, but nothing on the large depressing industrialized scale of Plovdiv. Then again, the weather was crappy for the 3 days I was there, so that can put a damper on anyone's opinion. Frick all these US cities. True terror is witnessing a major city in any fricking third world country. Miserable as crap. Most Redditors probably haven't been to major cities in third world countries for obvious reasons. Most poverty I've seen, easily Mumbai. Walking in the train stations, markets, or even around wherever it is you are staying, the streets and alleys are filled with all manner of homeless, disabled, disfigured street people. Not to mention we were nearly robbed by a gang, one of whom had a whip, outside of Gandhi's house. I thought we were gonna be killed until my uncle's driver pulled out a handgun. Absolute insanity. Rudest people, in my opinion. Beijing. Most of the people on the streets ignore Americans. Not a problem. until you get into a neighborhood and need a cab, but they refuse to drive you. The merchants are rather obnoxious as well. I was followed throughout the pearl market. Is that right? For over an hour by some woman who was angry I didn't want whatever she was selling. Another woman spit on my mother for turning down her price on a purse. Still a very neat experience. Most personally uncomfortable. Kowloon, Hong Kong. One of the cities with the highest population densities in the world. Hong Kong freaked me the heck out. I'm from Texas, where we have a seemingly never-ending amount of space. If you feel cramped, just drive out 10 minutes to an empty field. At this point in this trip, I had been through Kyoto, Beijing, and Shenzhen, finally landing in Kowloon. I had an absolute meltdown coming from the airport. I was tired and just wanted some space to breathe, but I was being jostled and whatnot from the sheer amount of people in the streets. Don't get me wrong, Hong Kong is an amazing place, and after a good night's sleep I enjoyed it quite a bit, but I still felt really claustrophobic the entire time. I'm just not meant for big cities. While I have said negative things about these cities, they are indeed very amazing. 2. I've been blessed with the ability to see such diverse cities, from the riches of Hong Kong, to the slums of Mumbai, to the cafes beneath La Alhambra in Granada, Spain. As Mark Twain said, travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. Corpus Christi, TX is where dreams go to die. It smells, it rains a lot, and there is nothing to do there except huff paint. I raise you Kingsville, TX, was so bad, we went to Corpus to have fun. I travel for a living. I can find a bright side to basically anywhere, but the worst I've been to was probably Georgetown, Guyana. Juarez, Mexico. Even before all the drug lords there became more powerful than the government, it was a pretty big dump. Camden. It makes the Baltimore filming locations from The Wire look like nice places to live. Makes Gary, Indiana look good. It's amazing how crappy Camden is. Then you go to the Cherry Hill Mall, a few miles away, and they are valet parking $100,000 Mercedes-Benzes. Camden is like a crappy extension of Philly ghetto. You could swim between the two. If you've never been there, why would you? Picture what your worst image of Detroit would be. Add in a few more abandoned factories, a tent city of homeless people, with a mayor. Break 50% of the windows. Take that broken glass and sprinkle it across 100% of the ground. Add in a higher percentage of crime. Everyone is on crack. Add the Philly skyline in the background. Have a bowl of Campbell's soup, but then get your bowl stolen by the sickhead prostitute who is blocking your view of Philly. You can try to call the cops, but there aren't any. Nassau, Bahamas. I guess it felt so disgusting because you have this incredible Atlantis resort surrounded by a horribly impoverished city, as if it was sucking the life out of it. New Delhi is by far the most depressing city I have ever been to. Dirty and chaotic. Abused street animals, just skin and bones. No traffic control whatsoever. It is so bad that I've seen ordinary citizens have to get out of their car and start directing traffic during hour-long traffic jams. Literally your car not moving for an hour. Not to mention the numerous fatal accidents you'll witness the aftermath of. The streets are littered purposefully. Quite the opposite of Singapore. There are no public bins and pretty much the norm is to tip rubbish on the ground. It wasn't limited to New Delhi though. So many places in India felt like one giant environmental catastrophe. It is disheartening to drive on roads that are surrounded by wild jungles, the kind of roads where they have signs warning you of elephants, and see trash trailing along either side of the road with no end in sight. People aren't treated much better, unfortunately. Surrey, particularly Whalley, British Columbia. I can't think of a worse place to live, grow up, raise kids, work, or do anything. It's a disrespect-laden, xenophobic, every color hates every color, crime-drenched suburb that everyone who is worth anything should strive to escape, with car theft rates at 155% of the national average, gang crime, drug crime, carjackings, crooked shopkeepers, teenage pregnancy and churches temples on every corner. This place is the armpit of the West Coast. Top 5 places for crime in Canada. Top 10 for murders, where the only good schools are private ones. Surrey is a place nobody should want to live. I even lived there for a while, so I know firsthand just how garbage it is. It's like this bleak cesspit of human failure surrounded by beautiful places. It's really depressing. But, to be fair, it's not Port Coquitlam, the place that once had 370% the national average for murders. The only reason that Port Coquitlam has such a high number of murders is because of Picton. One serial killer really skews the statistics. Lagos, Nigeria. I lived there for a while. On my daily commute I would see kids begging for money. I started handing out granola bars, for which the kids were thankful. That is until the adult running the ring started beating the kids for taking food instead of money. Polio is rampant. Everywhere there were beggars that used skateboards to get around because their legs did not function properly. Of course, the US efforts to spread polio vaccine were branded by local governors as a plot to make Nigerians impotent. So a disease eradicated nearly everywhere else in the world continues to run rampant in Nigeria. Even in the nice neighborhoods there were burning piles of trash everywhere, with animals and people foraging for food. A common punishment by gangs was to hang a tire filled with gasoline around your neck and light it. So occasionally you would see a man begging on the side of a road with what appeared to be a melted face and torso. Missionaries were frequent targets of robbers, since it was known that they had food and medicine that could be sold, and were unlikely to fight back. Bodies floating down the creek were a common occurrence. A colleague of mine, having pointed out a dead body that had washed up on the beach to a police officer, returned a few minutes later to see the cop poking it with a stick, trying to get the body to float away before it started to smell. Add to that car-sized potholes, rampant fraud, corruption and money that doubles as toilet paper and you have a feel for Lagos. Oslo, Norway. That plaque was terrible. The vibe you get from this place is that only Norwegians should be in Norway. It was too expensive, the food isn't that great, the nightlife doesn't exist unless you're from Norway, and the city is segregated worse than you'd believe. I once spent a few days in Târgu Mureș, Romania. It was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. We visited a gypsy village, which consisted of a dirt track running between two glass-fronted office buildings. The people lived in ramshackle huts and lacked clean water. The worst of this was the contrast between rich and poor, I think. And the children. They were so happy to see us, and cried when we left. So did we. We sanitized our hands, and felt like crap doing so. Fort McMurray, Alberta. Everything that sucks about a big city and everything that sucks about a small town rolled into one. Enid. Okay. My dad passed away there. His entire drug-addicted scum family lives lived there. His douchey child-molesting grandfather came from there. Drugs and dumbass parents run rampant in the streets. It's by far the worst place in the world I've been to. Newark, New Jersey. It's just a rundown heckhole. If you fly into there, one of the first things you see is a prison, and that's actually nicer than the rest of the place. Hartford, Connecticut after business hours is also freaking terrible. It's run down and there's very high rates of poverty and crime for such a small city. It's embarrassing that it's the capital of the state. I'm in Managua, Nicaragua right now. It's a mess. It was destroyed by an earthquake in 1972 and large swaths of the city were never rebuilt, so there are ruins everywhere, and it doesn't follow a logical layout. Rich neighborhoods lie beside some of the most impoverished neighborhoods in the country. It makes no sense. It's overwhelmingly sad. That said, the rest of the country is beautiful. It's a shame the capital city is in such disorder, too, because it's in a beautiful location. Stupid earthquake. Bucharest is the saddest city in Europe, I'm sure. It's full of stray dogs and seems to have an all-around bleak feeling to it. Swindon, UK, the most depressing, featureless urban agglomerate I've ever had the misfortune of passing through in my life. Ah, crap. Actually it may have been Slough. It starts with S and is somewhere between London and Bristol. Riverside, CA, little desert town with nothing to do, no future, and AVG temps of 100 plus, and so much pollution it's like breathing in glass. Though I have been convinced that it is really a conspiracy to make global warming worse in order to make the town beachfront property. Anywhere in the IE, Hemet, San Bernardino, Lake Elsinore, Shudder, all gross. Springfield, MA takes the cake. That place sucks. I wasn't a big fan of LA or Miami, but South Beach was nice and redeemed Miami for me. Came here for Springfield, was not disappointed. Downtown is outright depressing. It feels like you might get stabbed at any moment. It just gets worse the further you get away from there too. Except of course over by the Hall of Fame, where the tourists are kept segregated from the rest of the city by the highway. El Paso, Texas is where Hope was taken, put in a burlap sack, sodomized, and brutally murdered. It is the perfect physical representation of awful. Without a doubt, hands down, it was the worst. I've been many places, and with the exception of places consumed by abject poverty, El Paso is the worst. Worse than Michigan. Worse than anything. Frick, that city. Agra, India. It's unfortunate that if you want to visit the Taj Mahal, you have to go to Agra to see it. I didn't get the same eerie vibe from any other place I visited in India. Has anyone else been that found the same thing? I haven't traveled much, but my dad's been all over. Central America, South America, Europe, the Middle East, India, all over the Pacific Islands, China, etc. He always says, hands down, without a doubt, Mumbai is the worst place he's ever been. The way he puts it, Slumdog Millionaire was sugar-coated. The way they injure children to garner sympathy as beggars is horrifying. He's talking about festering open wounds that are kept that way, eyeballs hanging from the optic nerve. Really gruesome stuff. The city is filthy and poor. One night after eating there, his gastrointestinal distress was so severe he literally thought he was going to die. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.